Resuming debate, the honourable member Skeena Balclay Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise today and speak to this opposition motion brought forward by our friends in the Conservative Party down the way, and I'm even more pleased to be sharing my time with the excellent member for Elmwood Transcona. This motion proposes an amendment to the Constitution of Canada that would repeal Section 24 of the Saskatchewan Act and deem the change retroactive to August 29, 1966. Notably, this would remove a provision dating back to 1880, Madam Speaker, prior to Saskatchewan becoming a province in 1905, which exempted Canadian Pacific Railway from paying provincial taxes in Saskatchewan. This has been an interesting issue to learn about over the past 48 hours, and I understand that this motion here before us today complements a similar motion the Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly unanimously passed in November of last year. Now, I might seem to my colleagues a bit of an unlikely speaker on this issue, being a BC boy and all, but I'm honored to serve as the NDP's transport critic, and of course, trains transport things, and Canadian Pacific owns trains, and hence, for the next 10 minutes, Madam Speaker, I'm your guy. More importantly, I'm a proud Canadian, and I believe in the principles of fairness and responsibility that I believe lie at the heart of this issue. So for folks following along back home, and I won't hazard to guess how many of those there might be, but I believe these are the basic relevant facts in this matter. Canadian Pacific Railway obtained access to a huge swath of our country, much of it unceded Indigenous land, I should add, to build their railway. And while the corporation made a significant investment, it also received substantive incentives from the federal government of the day. Among those incentives, the federal government agreed in its contract with Canadian Pacific to exempt the railroad from paying taxes in perpetuity. It's surprising, I know, that a Conservative government would agree to such immense corporate welfare, but there you have it. Despite this, Madam Speaker, and for reasons that aren't exactly clear, CP has been voluntarily paying taxes to the province of Saskatchewan for a century. It's also surprising to see such voluntary corporate benevolence. Today, Canadian Pacific wants the taxes it has paid to the province since 2002 to be returned in the sum of $341 million on the basis that it shouldn't have paid those taxes in the first place. I'm not a lawyer, and I won't be making legal arguments today. I think the battery of lawyers that are engaged in the court case that is ongoing will have that aspect well in hand. But rather, the argument I'll make in support of this motion is a simple moral one. Today, Canadian Pacific benefits greatly from the province of Saskatchewan and the infrastructure and services its residents have funded through their taxes. CP employees drive to work on roads paid for by the people of Saskatchewan. They utilize hospitals paid for by the people of Saskatchewan. Their kids go to schools paid for by the people of Saskatchewan. Ignoring for a moment the historic paperwork negotiated under who knows what kinds of circumstances, I doubt many in this place would dispute that Canadian Pacific has a responsibility as a corporation to contribute its fair share to the province's coffers. This is hardly a company, Madam Speaker, that needs either a hand up or a handout. Last year, CP made $3 billion in profits. And it's not like being exempt from taxes would level the playing field on which CP operates. Quite the opposite, Madam Speaker. After all, Canadian Pacific's main competitor in Canada, CN Rail, it pays its taxes. I imagine CP's other competitors in the United States also pay applicable state and federal taxes. This is about fair treatment for Saskatchewan in this confederation. Saskatchewan deserves to be treated equally with the same control over its internal affairs and taxes that every other province enjoys. This jurisdictional inequity that has been raised by this motion unfairly denies them that. The people of Saskatchewan have made their will clear, and the unanimous passage of the same motion in the provincial legislature illustrates there is cross-party support for this change, and it's time for this House to act. By nullifying the historic tax exemption, this motion essentially codifies into law the practice CP has already been following for an entire century. It seems, Madam Speaker, to be the right and proper thing for us to do. Besides a questionable historic contract, how could CP possibly argue it shouldn't pay its fair share to the province of Saskatchewan? People in Saskatchewan want their taxes to go to the public services they rely on, things like healthcare and education. They don't want them to pad the profits of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The money CP Rail is demanding could be much better spent, and I think everyone in this House will agree that they could be much better spent helping the people of Saskatchewan. Now, the railroads, and I speak of railroads in the plural, the railroad's pivotal role in the development of our country is one of the central narratives that we're taught in elementary school. Yet in many ways, Madam Speaker, it was a Faustian bargain, because today we're left with corporations that wield power far out of proportion with their place in our society. Railway companies have their own private police forces who investigate their actions when things go wrong, as we saw in British Columbia after the disaster that killed 3 men in 2019 near Field. Dylan Paratus, Andrew Dockrell, and Daniel Waldenberger-Bulmer. Their families are still fighting for justice, Madam Speaker. Railways own vast tracts of land, much of it adjacent to communities, which too often constrains community development and restricts public access. Railway companies design their own safety plans, which are opaque to citizens and communities, and as the Auditor General found in her follow-up audit last year, are inadequately monitored for effectiveness by Transport Canada. And railway companies own the tracks themselves, precluding the federal government from operating a dependable passenger rail service in much of the country during a time of climate crisis when our national bus service has been shut down for good. Now, I certainly recognize the positive role that railways play as well. They're certainly important employers in our communities. In the community I live in, the community of Smithers, the town is named after the former president of the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, Sir Alfred Smithers. But notwithstanding those things, when I talk to community leaders about their relationship with the railroads, sadly, Madam Speaker, mostly what I hear are stories of frustration. In light of this dynamic, admittedly difficult to reshape given all that has happened, I would submit that the least we should expect is that these highly profitable companies pay their taxes. Let's put an end to this historic injustice, and I hope all parties in this House will come together, it sounds like they will, and ensure that Saskatchewan is treated fairly as an equal partner in our confederation. Now, I'll end with this, Madam Speaker. Learning about this issue made me think of my mom's family, who settled in Regina in the 1800s. My great-great-grandfather, George Broder, settled in Regina in 1882, right around the same time that CP was building the railroad. His son-in-law, my great-grandfather, Neil Taylor, was a lawyer, a businessman, a veteran, an athlete, and someone who loved his home province deeply. Incidentally, he ran for the Federal Conservative Party in 1945, and I checked the electoral record, and I was simultaneously delighted and dismayed to see that he was trounced by someone representing a little party called the CCF. Now, Neil, my great-grandfather, was also known as Piffles, a nickname he was given in reference to a turn of phrase that was popular during that period of time. If someone said or did something that was, shall we say, Madam Speaker, extremely lacking in merit, one would say it was piffle. Nonsense, rubbish, balderdash, and all the other things that I'm not allowed to say in this place either directly or indirectly. I asked my uncle Sam in Vancouver, he's our family's historian, what he thought my great-grandfather would have said about this issue if he were alive today, what he would say about a wealthy railroad company trying to get out of its responsibilities to the people of Saskatchewan. He said he'd probably say that it was a bunch of piffle. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Regina Leeuwen.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm happy to ask a question. And first of all, I'd like to thank the member for his support of our motion. Saskatchewan appreciates it. It's also heartwarming to see how everyone tries to make a connection to Saskatchewan. As we say, all roads lead to Saskatchewan. So I'm happy to see members trying to make that connection because it is truly the best province in our country. So I understand that the railway does have a cut out a wide swath, and I think if we could find agreement on something else today other than the motion is maybe if we had other ways to move goods back and forth across our country other than the railway, say some pipelines, that would be a good start as well. So I'm wondering if my colleague would agree that some pipelines also do need to be built in this country moving forward.
Honourable member for Skeena Buckley Valley.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly appreciate what my honourable friend is trying to do here with this question. Now, I agree that things that bring us together as different provinces across the country are good things indeed. And I would submit that given his province's excellent renewable energy resources, that perhaps an even better opportunity is to come together around the vision of a clean energy economy, one that delivers the kind of safe and secure future for our kids that I think we all want.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, for people that might actually be following the debate today, if you listen to a number of the comments, one would think that CP has actually not been paying any taxes to the province of Saskatchewan. And we know that not to be true, Madam Speaker. And I'm wondering if the member can provide his thoughts in terms of, yes, we want to ensure that there's tax fairness. But it's also important that we be transparent on the issue by saying that CP has actually been paying taxes. They have not been using that particular clause in order to avoid paying taxes.
Honourable member for Skeena Buckley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for the question. He will note that in my speech, I detailed at some length the fact that CP for some reason has been paying its taxes for 100 years voluntarily, despite a clause in the contract that clearly exempts them from doing so. The question I have is a similar one, which is why all of a sudden is this railway company wanting its taxes reimbursed to it? What happened just recently, 13 years ago? Maybe there was a change in their legal team or a new staff member that wanted to prove himself, and all of a sudden they're coming forward and saying, we want $300 and some million from the people of Saskatchewan, and we don't want to pay taxes going forward. What changed in their philosophy as a company? That's my question.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. We seem to be on the same page in that respect. I'd like to ask him if this proposal from the Conservative Party were to be adopted, if we open the Constitution, etc., what is, in his opinion, if we look in the future, what the impact this could have for Quebec, which would like to also amend the Constitution?
Skeena Buckley Valley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my esteemed colleague from the bloc for the question. And I listened carefully to his colleagues' speeches on this matter, and I understand there are a number of long-standing grievances they'd like to see remedied in one way or another. This is something that has been done before by other provinces to make limited changes to the Constitution using this mechanism. That's an avenue that is available to every province. And I'm not a constitutional scholar, and I'll leave it to those more educated in those areas to give some sense of what might be possible. But absolutely, it's important that it's a living document and that we make changes as appropriate over time to reflect the will of the people of our country.